this afternoon. In about 2 or 3 minutes, C-SPAN will tape the program and probably will be aired a number of times this week. Now, the speakers and the moderator's bio are in the program, so I don't need to repeat them. But just want to say one thing. Last night and early this morning, we talked a lot about the dreams. American dream, Chinese dream, one world, one dream. But it seems to me this panel is really a dream team or dream panel. And we have a lot of heavyweights. And as we know that during the past 2 decades, U.S.-China relations went through some difficult periods or some crises. In a non-small part, it's because of these people, our speakers today and moderator today, their deep and intimate knowledge of China, their sound judgment, and their vision, and then we come back to the right track. So really, that they not only play an important role in the past, present, but also in the future. Now, before turning it over to moderator, Ambassador Roy, I also want to say that all of these speakers are good friends of Committee 100. Ambassador Roy also served as an advisor for the advisory board of the Committee 100. So please join me in welcoming this dream team and Ambassador Roy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think we're going to have a fascinating panel this afternoon on the subject of the White House and U.S. policy toward China, an insider's view. All of our panelists are genuine insiders. They have all been senior advisors for Asian affairs, special assistants to the President of the United States. At least 2 of them have served on the National Security Council in at least 2 different administrations. 2 of them have served in Republican administrations. 2 have served in Democratic administrations. They have impeccable credentials on China and on Asia, in some cases academic credentials, Professor Lieberthal, in some cases simply extensive work on China, so that they bring to their jobs and to their past jobs a real knowledge of the subject matter we're going to be talking about. Now, why should I be chairing a panel of this sort? Because in 4.5 decades in the U.S. government, I managed to avoid any assignment on the National Security Council. I assume it's because I'm the director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a nonpartisan organization devoted to the sort of academic objectivity so often missing in Washington. And this academic objectivity I bring to the task today offsets the fact that my entire government experience was in the State Department, which has frequently been viewed by the National Security Council as the mortal enemy, to be kept at bay at all costs. So this is a tribute to, I think, our faith in academic objectivity that I'm able to work with my friends here today on this panel. Each of the presenters will speak for 7 or 8 minutes. Then we'll have a chance to open up for questions, and we'll get some sense of how the White House is involved with China policy. Let me say that in over 50 years in Washington, being associated with China policy, this is the one relationship which is embedded in politics in the United States. You cannot have a China policy in the United States in which a president is not personally involved in some fashion, for better or for worse. The State Department cannot on its own conduct a China policy. This has been illustrated, and most of the presidents that these senior advisors have served with have been personally involved, but we will get their insights on how the government deals with these types of issues. Doug, why don't we begin with you?
Well, thank you, Stapleton. Thank you all this opportunity to talk to you today. When I realized that I was bookending Jeff Bader as the oldest person representing this form of indentured labor in Washington, I thought I would think back to a time when I was an undergraduate. There was an article published by a person who had just left the Kennedy-Johnson administration in a similar position in the old days, organized a little differently in that time. Jim Thompson, who had been a Harvard scholar, went back to Harvard, spent some time with the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. And he did a series of articles for the Atlantic Monthly at the time. This is like 1969 or 70, describing what it's like to be in Washington. And he did it with a bit of tongue-in-cheek. He described how he came to depart the NSC. He had been assigned in the end of the Kennedy presidency to brief then Vice President Johnson, who was going to take a whirlwind tour around the world. Famous tour. Remember, if some of you may remember, he brought back a camel driver from Pakistan and some other interesting curios on his travels. And assigned to brief Johnson before he goes on behalf of President Kennedy, Jim Thompson went in and explained to Johnson, who was a cattle rancher from Texas, that Australia, where he was stopping, and New Zealand were very proud of the sheep that they raised there. Trip went on. Johnson was very happy with the results. Kennedy was killed. Johnson was president just a few weeks. And one morning, the Secret Service came through in a wedge, and Jim Thompson was pushed back against a wall, and Lyndon Johnson came steaming behind the Secret Service, 3 or 4 steps, head down, looking forward. Came to an abrupt halt, wheeled around, walked back, walked up to Thompson, looked him in the face, and said, "Sheep." At which point Thompson said he realized his time had come to an end at the NSC. So it gives you a sense it's not the most important place in the world. I started at the NSC during the end of the Reagan period, when George Shultz was secretary. He had worked very hard on the relationship with China and the rest of Asia. He has famously said that working Asia is like gardening. You have to get back out there, pull up the weeds, nurture the plants, put a little food on the plants from time to time. And one of the fruits of that was a trip he took to China, which Deng Xiaoping wanted to become truly memorable. And it became really the equivalent of an imperial tour of northeastern China, with whole provinces seemingly being brought to a stop as the Schultz train made its way through the Lijiang area, the beautiful Guizhou area, up to Shandong to climb Mount Tai, and to get a real sense of traditional Chinese culture by visiting Confucius's home. I remember in about the 99th room of the tour, he was asking who had arranged this particular trip, because it was a really long tour. But that was sort of a high point, and then President George Bush I came to office. And as everybody in this room knows, he's an enthusiast for China. His 17 or 18 months in China in the early 70s had made him a champion of the U.S.-China relationship. And coincident with his election and inauguration, the Emperor of Japan, Hirohito, passed away. And so it was known that there would be a state funeral very quickly after President Bush was inaugurated. And he determined early on that he wanted to use that trip as an opportunity to see Deng Xiaoping, because Deng, being as old as he was, may not be around much longer, and President Bush might not have an excuse to get there quite so soon again. So he asked for a trip to be organized. I did some advance work on that, a quick trip to Japan, Korea, and PRC. And that was sort of the high point of the Bush presidency with respect to China. And in fact, the trip itself, when he visited Beijing, descended into a chaotic situation because an invitation had gone out to a dissident, Fang Lizhi, and President Yang Shangkun, who was nominally representing China, wouldn't attend a banquet where this dissident was present. And so it was a big minuet and police work all through the evening, and sort of dominated the news, and really disappointed, I think, President Bush, who wanted to set off at a high note on that relationship. In the course of my visit to Beijing as part of the advance team, I got pulled aside by one of our embassy officers who said, before you go back, you need to know something. You need to know this city is about to blow up, that in every factory floor, In every school, steam is building about unfairness, injustice. And of course, this was just a little over 20 years ago in early 1989, and we saw the physical manifestation of this early warning in April, May, leading up to June 4th. June 4th, of course, brought us the clearing of Tiananmen Square, the Tiananmen incident, and for me at the NSC, it was a matter then of becoming what in the Navy we call a damage control officer. We had taken a very severe wound to our ship of relationships with China, and we were going slowly under with criticism from every quarter, from public interest and the like. President Bush, through all that period, as everybody here knows, was determined to salvage as much of the relationship and to keep as much of the cooperation between the United States and China